You know shit is f***ed up when Grace Randolph, of all people, is out here making sense. Let's discuss.
I watch so you don't have to.
All I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
So the Penguin is fresh off winning multiple Emmys and easily winning the internal ratings war with its fellow recently released DC shows. So naturally, inquiring minds have to ask the question why. Some will say it's Penguin's direct connection to Batman, a character that always seems to command people's attention. Others like myself will say that the material, unlike some other recent DC projects, speaks for itself. I don't think that it's any coincidence that the highest rated show of these four takes the material the most seriously, and was shepherded by a genuine auteur with a unique creative vision. People who know ball understand that that has always been the recipe for success when it comes to DC on film. The more the studio is involved and the less filmmaker driven it is, the worse the content gets. And no, plucking a Marvel guy out of their lineup of hired hands and giving him complete creative control is not the answer either. Both audiences and real critics are telling you how they prefer their DC content without saying a word.
That makes sense.
And no, for anyone who's going to bring it up, Rotten Tomatoes scores still do not count. It's 2025, let's be serious. I do think there is a conversation to be had about the way that the DC fandom overall has been completely split down the middle in recent years. Some people do like what James Gunn is doing, and you know what? More power to those people. But for me personally, and for a lot of other DC fans, they prefer their DC content to be significantly less cringe, and frankly a lot more mature. As I've said many times before, for anyone, let alone the head of a studio, to assume that you can treat DC as a property the same way that Marvel was treated over at Disney tells me that you have a fundamental misunderstanding of what DC is actually supposed to be. And much to my surprise, this is becoming more and more apparent, even to the people who are somewhat on board with James Gunn's vision.
Then why the f*** didn't you say so?
Imagine for a second someone who enjoyed Superman 2025 having enough sense to acknowledge that the movie might not be for everyone. A foreign concept to some fanboys on the internet, I know, but somehow a talking head on YouTube seems to have grasped the concept before they did. A great sign of intelligence to me is someone who is able to hear a different perspective and not get upset about it. Now, while I wouldn't say that Grace Randolph is the most open person to different perspectives, because I have first-hand knowledge that that may not be the case, I'll at least give her credit for acknowledging that some DC fans, a lot of DC fans, might not be on board with what James Gunn is offering. Grace Randolph said in a recent live stream on the subject of the apparent lack of hype around James Gunn's Man of Tomorrow announcement. Quote, DC has suddenly shrunk, and that's surprising. I'm curious to see what happens going forward. As you can see, people here in her chat still care very much about the Snyderverse. I think it's not just the Snyderverse specifically, but I think they liked Zack Snyder's darker, more epic, and grander approach to the material. Knowing that they are going to have to do a couple of years of this cutesy funny stuff, I think it's going to be difficult for some people. Even though I loved the Superman movie and what James Gunn did, I said that it wasn't what DC had been famous for all of these years. DC has always been the antithesis of Marvel content, darker, grander, more epic. And when you take that away, it's just more Marvel. Now, people like to ignore this, but as I've said many times, this conversation to me is much bigger than James Gunn versus Zack Snyder. Other directors do exist. To me, to constantly boil this down to a fan war pissing match is also doing the DC brand a disservice. To me, throughout the course of history, all the best DC adaptations have always been more serious and more epic. And I think the general interest and love for those projects tell you that might be closer to what people expect from DC. Let's just put Zack Snyder aside for a moment. Tim Burton took the material seriously when he decided to direct Batman '89. And he rescued the character of Batman and DC from campy obscurity only for the studio to ruin it all because they wanted to sell more toys, which eventually pushed him and Michael Keaton away from the third film. And that's when DC went back to being campy, and it pretty much ruined its public perception for years. Only for Christopher Nolan to once again elevate the material by taking it seriously. Not long after Zack Snyder's tenure, the studio once again expressed interest in being more like Marvel. And the content post-Snyder reflected that, and I don't think that the results really blew anyone away. Only for people like Matt Reeves and Todd Phillips to come along and again take the material seriously, and guess what? People responded with admiration.
Something very familiar about all this.
This has been an ongoing problem with DC and WB for many years now. And you could look at this and say, well, it's just WB constantly falling back on Batman and his related cast of characters. But I would respond to that and say I think there's a reason that audiences like Batman so much, especially cinematically. And that's because he has now had multiple adaptations over the years that have taken the material seriously, and it usually offers filmmakers an opportunity to create a comic book movie that is a little bit deeper, a little bit more meaningful, and a little bit more of quality than what we were typically getting in the genre.
Why so serious?
And this is the part of this entire conversation that I don't think people seem to understand. When I say they need to take the material seriously, that doesn't necessarily mean that every character you adapt needs to be dark and brooding like Batman. I think Sam Raimi took the material seriously with his Spider-Man films, and I would not call those movies dark and brooding. You can have a situation where each character, each story in your DC brand has its own unique tone that is appropriate for that story or character without making a mockery of the source material. Grace Randolph actually put it perfectly. A lot of DC fans just aren't into the cutesy funny stuff, and that's just the reality of the situation. And those people are more than entitled to feel that way. And to me, what James Gunn is trying to do, at least so far, goes against what I am looking for as a fan in my DC content.
No, don't like that.
Now, I do realize that not every upcoming DC project is written and directed by James Gunn. And as a fan, I am thankful for that, because now there is a possibility that one or more of those projects might actually be decent. I'm interested to see how much of the Clayface project is Mike Flanagan's original vision. I'm interested to see if Lanterns can channel some of that true detective energy, like some people are suggesting that it will. And I'm interested to see the Batman Part 2. And here's the thing, the fact that Matt Reeves took so long to write the script actually makes me more optimistic for the final product. If some of these projects are vastly different than what we've been getting so far, if they are of quality, and if they have limited James Gunn creative involvement, then I will react accordingly. When I say this is not what a lot of DC fans want, I'm strictly talking about what I've seen of the DCU so far, and so far all of those projects were the product of James Gunn and James Gunn alone. I do not think he is talented enough or versatile enough as a filmmaker or a studio executive to give me what I want as a fan. I'm looking for an alternative to what they are doing at Marvel, not a carbon copy, which means I want something more serious, more epic, more grandiose than what we've been getting so far.
Y'all be cool. Right on.